Okay, starting at the beginning, the entry point into producing and thinking about Latino science fiction. Okay, and I was going to say, for me, science fiction was at first simply a source of pleasure. You know, my earliest cinematic experience was watching Star Wars in a drive-in in 1978, but over time, I found that science fiction offered much more. You know, a set of metaphors to frame, describe, validate, and understand myself, family, and community. In my first short film, Papa Papa, I used the language and imagery of virtual reality to reflect on my Peruvian father's position, living in the United States, but through the television and telephone, staying deeply connected to the world he'd left far behind. So virtual reality was a way to kind of visualize a third space between North and South, a kind of reflection of the migrant mind space. In our short film, Dia de la Independencia, which was based on a comic strip by legendary cartoonist Lalo Alcaraz, and which spoofed the Will Smith blockbuster Independence Day, we used the imagery of the sci-fi trope of the alien invasion to visualize and mock the anti-immigrant hysteria around aliens coming across the border. In Sleep Dealer, I used the concept of telepresence to imagine a future world in which workers in Mexico enter factories where they plug their bodies into a futuristic internet to control machines or robots that perform their labor in the United States. And so this is a world in which pure labor crosses the border, but migrant bodies stay out. And in a new project, I'm exploring themes of digital surveillance and immigration enforcement as a backdrop for a kind of cyberpunk techno thriller. Okay. So over the years, I've come to believe that communities like ours, communities that are bifurcated by distance and that are the focus of a techno-military system, the immigration enforcement regime and its militarized borders, that these communities that we live in, that we inhabit, are particularly rich and urgent sites for science fiction imaginings. And maybe it goes without saying, but there was no Hollywood or film industry support for this kind of work. The support came from nonprofit arts organizations, professors, colleagues, and comrades. To put these images on screen, I had to turn to those communities and to the set of tools and resources I had access to. Specifically, this has meant collage. Finding, borrowing, remixing sounds and images has been key to every step in this process, through every phase, from conception and development through final production and post-production. In Papa Papa, one example of the digital collage I'm talking about is in this scene, when I used an early 3D image software called Infinity to model the street where my father grew up in the center of urban Lima. In order to achieve the kind of rough textures in this 3D model, I cut up bits of home movies and imported those into the software. And I also, you see, I kind of cut and pasted my father's face onto the cartoon body. So it's a kind of cut and paste 3D process here. In Dia de la Independencia, we used an early version of Adobe After Effects to collage together images from postcards with footage from war games and images from CNN. Let's see those coming. And we added in an original 3D model of a red chili pepper shooting a laser. In Y Braceros, which was the short film where the idea for Sleep Dealer was kind of first worked out, I used footage of my dad, who plays the worker, old industrial footage from the Prelinger archives. This is a black and white film produced by the California Growers Council, collaged together with images from a Tropicana orange juice commercial, and then obviously blended in with original 3D images. And so this approach was inspired by artists who were working at the time, including Lourdes Portillo, Craig Baldwin, Guillermo Gomez Peña, Presente, and very heavily by Ocho Magazine, right? Ocho Magazine, for those of you who don't know, was created by Esteban Zul and Lalo Alcaraz in the 90s and was known as something like a mad magazine for mad Chicanos. The zine was a masterpiece of remix, taking images from everywhere and anywhere. So those artists taught me, inspired me to think of my work not as collage, but as something much cooler and deeper and rascuachismo. In his seminal essay, Tomás Ibarra Frausto refuses to define rascuachismo, saying that to define it would be to betray it. Instead, he articulates attitudes and strategies of what he calls an irrepressible spirit manifested in the art and life of the Chicano community. Some of his reflections on Rascuachismo: it's a funky, irreverent stance that debunks convention and spoofs protocol. To be Rascuache is to be down but not out. Rascuachismo is brash and hybrid, a sensibility attuned to mixtures and confluence. Communion is preferred over purity. And so my sense was that there's not only an aesthetics, but also a politics to Rascuachismo. Rascuache is bottom up, not top down. It's produced by people, not committees and corporations. Rascuache techniques are antagonistic to copyright. Rascuache thought celebrates the free flow of images and ideas and materials in the pursuit of happiness and beauty. In that sense, it might not be too much to say Rascuache politics are anti-capitalist. So one way or another, I found that the digital tools that were emerging in the late 90s and early 2000s, like Photoshop, After Effects, Morph, that those tools could be used to digitally produce Rascuache work that could be understood as part of a continuum with its analog ancestors. Meaning an analog Rascuache gesture, like a plant potter being made from a used tire decorated with vibrant leftover house paint, could be theorized or understood in a way similar to a digital collage produced with software like Photoshop, sampling found footage textures to produce original images. There was a flow from analog to digital Rascuachismo. And moving image Rascuache techniques, I eventually learned, were not only practiced in outsider, low-budget realms. In 2020, I was hired to write and direct a science fiction Zorro film. It was my first job working in the film industry. I developed a socially grounded techno-thriller reboot of the old Avenger character called Zorro 2.0. I wrote a few drafts of the script, but for the project to be actually made, we had to go find a partner of like a bigger company, a streamer or a studio who could finance and distribute the film. The producers and I took the project out as a script and started to get rejections. And so I turned to my old friend, Rascuachismo, and I learned that in Hollywood, filmmakers often make little videos called ripple-matics for projects that are in development. So a director will make a ripple-matic by taking images from existing movies and re-editing them, add new sound, and effectively make a kind of collage trailer for a movie that does not exist. It's part of the sales process, right? So here's the ripple-matic, the Rascuache trailer I made from scraps of other films to help sell the idea of Zorro 2.0.
Illegal aliens entering our country.
My name is Oscar de la Vega. My mom brought me to the US. So yeah, I'm one of them, and illegal. But I didn't used to think about it much. I was into my friends, new tech, old movies. The old Avenger was Mexican. And so when I started to hack, I took on the handle Z0RR0. I thought learning to code would be my way to make it in America.
ICE agents rounding up hundreds in deportation raids.
But after Unit 187 took my mom, and with the Jackal coming after me,
armed vigilantes, unpaid and unsanctioned.
I only have one choice. Put on the mask. Hack them. But what do you do when you find out they know more about you than you do?
So, well, with that asset now, with the little trailer, we restarted our campaign to find support for the film. And after seeing the sample reel, the rest of the studios in Hollywood all passed. It made no difference at all. True story. The studios weren't interested in even continuing the writing or development process, much less funding production. Time passed and the producers lost the rights to the Zorro name. So the cyberpunk anti-ice Zorro film will never be made. And that failure was not surprising. Currently Latino filmmakers are less than 3% of feature film directors and producers working in the industry. And that number includes Latin American filmmakers, Spanish filmmakers, and all the projects in which Latinx folks produce or direct, but that don't tell Latino stories. So the actual number of US Latino filmmakers who find film industry support to tell stories related to our community's lived experience is a tiny fraction of that 3%. And so my current understanding is that we are working in a context in which the film industry has at least complete disinterest or quite possibly active disdain towards the broad project of US Latinos reflecting on our lives in this incredibly powerful medium. Thank you so much, it's all good. So it was in this moment of reflection and perhaps depression late last year that I met some software called artificial intelligence. Okay. So as has widely been discussed, right, what this new generation of AI does is it detects patterns in vast troves of digital words, images, or sounds in order to generate new media based on user prompts. There's a lot to discuss here, starting with the phrase artificial intelligence, a phrase I believe is misleading, right? In terms of describing these systems, artificial is a useless word because marking them as separate from nature illuminates nothing. The algorithms are as artificial as email. And the word intelligence is a slippery and problematic concept, even when we use it to describe humans. The two words in combination confuse what these systems are, what they do, and what we might expect of them. So to me, these algorithms are actually something we're already familiar with, synthesizers. They're software that operate in a mode of creative synthesis. Maybe we could call them generative synthesizers or synthetic authors, but I'm going to use AI because it's the phrase being used, but I wanted to flag that it's a misleading starting point. And I also like the way that centering the synthesizer invokes the incredibly rich way our communities have always contested and innovated with technologies that were never designed for us. Okay, so as folks probably know, AI is being experimented with and deployed in nearly every field, from medicine to law, from archaeology to journalism. For the rest of this talk, I'm going to focus only on the systems that synthesize images. The way that the algorithms I've been playing with function is that you give them words and they give back images. So at first, I was curious about how the AI would handle abstract concepts and translate them into pictures. So I asked for an image of the triumph of capital over labor. This is the image that was produced in response. It took about a minute. And then I asked for an image of labor triumphing over capital, just for no particular reason other than curiosity. And I added the qualifier female because the system clearly defaulted to male. This is what it gave me. I was stunned. The interpretation of abstract ideas, the overall composition, the color and light, all of it was breathtaking to me. It raised a huge set of questions, and I'm going to get into those, but it was also simply and deeply exciting. Then I started to go towards things I've always wanted to see. I asked for Zapatistas in space. A friend gave me some pointers on how to use the software more effectively. I rendered a series of Mesoamerican space helmets. Well, ever since I realized over 20 years ago that Star Wars was, in a sense, a story of a refugee, an uprooted farm boy, a moisture farming campesino, if you will, displaced by an imperial army. I've been dreaming of producing an explicitly Latino space opera. Professor Curtis Mares, also presente, I think, his fantastic research detailing the connections between George Lucas's early life in the California Central Valley and the struggles of farm workers happening right there, right then. All of that thinking informed and deepened the ideas I had and the sense that there was something here that was resonant. And then when I saw the clearly Aztec influences in the production design of the original Blade Runner, design decisions that resonated with the character of Gaff, the futuristic Pachuco character in Blade Runner, played by Edward James Olmos, I only felt more excited about a Mesoamerican future space fantasy. But in the early 2000s, when these ideas were forming, I still, back then, only had the tools of kind of brute collage. To feel the ideas, to see them, I made this collage using images from Blade Runner and audio from Luis Valdez's seminal film Zoot Suit, which of course also stars Edward James Olmos. Blade Runner was released in 1982, Zoot Suit in 1981. So here's a collage, Blade Runner meets Zoot Suit.
Ladies and gentlemen, the mono you're about to see is a construct of fact and fantasy. But relax, weigh the facts, and enjoy the pretense. Our Pachuco realities will only make sense if you grasp their stylization. It was a secret fantasy for Vivato, living in or out of the Pachucada, to put on the Zoot Suit and play the myth. Más chucote que la chingada. Pues órale! Escape through the barrio streets of your mind.
And so now, just a few months ago, with access to these new algorithms, I started to ask the AI to make images for the Mesoamerican space fantasy I've been dreaming of. And these are images produced in the first round of that work. These were images that, to me, were in a sense familiar. They looked like my dreams. I knew they were essentially a kind of collage. The machine was blending together elements I was asking it to. But the images were far, far beyond what collage could ever achieve. To me, some of the images I generated hit the highest register, inspiring feelings of wonder and awe. Was this a dream or a nightmare? What does it mean if a machine can generate images that inspire awe? The flow of images I rendered induced a kind of techno vertigo. I felt deeply disturbed that I didn't understand how math was making images that I loved in the way that I love the best human-produced art that I have on my walls. The first few days of play with these systems were intense and strange and sleepless. To try to get my bearings, I told myself that maybe this was a new dimension of my familiar practice of digital rasquachismo. Maybe it was algorithmic rasquachismo, a new frontier of synthetic creativity. Sampling, borrowing, mixing, and matching were, of course, core to the birth of hip hop. Maybe these visual synthesizers would help create imagery that the film industry has been ignoring and suppressing. Or was this yet another stage, a new powerful phase of the techno-libertarian hellscape we live in, a full frontal attack not only on labor, but on what makes us feel unique as humans, our creativity? In short, I felt a cascade of contradictory feelings. And in this last part of my remarks, I'm going to try to lay out some of those feelings and some of the arguments about this technology that I'm tracking. Okay, so there are questions about theft. These systems have indisputably been trained on images that are protected by copyright and by countless artists and image makers who did not consent for their work to be used in this way. You can see in the images I've shared lots of indigenous influence. I was asking for that. Clearly, it's absorbed and sort of vacuumed up, cataloged, and found the underlying patterns that make Mayan aesthetics what they are, or Huichol aesthetics what they are. And so there's at least one lawsuit attacking these systems along those lines. Underneath the hood of these questions about copyright and ownership are also questions about labor. Because of my work on Sleep Dealer, I've been tracking digital labor dynamics in which workers in the global South perform labor for the North via the net. And one of the spheres of that kind of work for more than a decade now has been teaching AI to recognize patterns. An example, like for a self-driving car to know if a child or a raccoon is running in front of it, human workers must first label by hand, frame by frame, hundreds and thousands of hours of footage of children and raccoons running in front of cars, right? That tedious work has been done by companies like iMerit, which operates in India with a workforce of 2,200 workers. Another massive player in the training of AI is Amazon's digital labor marketplace, Mechanical Turk. This platform in which companies post tiny digital jobs that are performed by an on-demand workforce of approximately 300,000 people, who are basically operate as piecemeal digital workers around the globe. That system's been used, for example, to teach AI to translate Arabic Twitter for the Defense Department. Okay. But what really struck me when I looked into the training of the image synthesizers, the software I've been using, is that this kind of paid digital labor was not what powered the current breakthrough. The model of paying workers in factories or on crowdsourcing platforms like Mechanical Turk was not able to produce a set of labeled images that connect picture with text, right? That's what the data set has to be. The factory work and the piecemeal online crowdsource work wasn't enough to create a data set big enough to get the AI to generate really high quality images. Instead, the data that ultimately educated the current image generating AI systems was scraped from the web. In March of 2022, just a year ago, a German research group released a breakthrough database called Lion 5B. Lion stands for Large Scale Artificial Intelligence Open Network. The 5B means 5 billion images in the set. To produce this set, researchers scraped 5 billion images from the web and used the alt text captions that were already there, the text that displays when an image can't be rendered or when a vision impaired user is on the web, to create a truly massive set of image and text correlations. This gigantic set of image-text pairs was finally big enough to teach the AI the underlying patterns it needed to understand in order to take words and create new images from them. It's of course still a story about labor, but it's a story of the vast production of knowledge by the public, by multitudes of unpaid people posting and labeling images on countless websites. But it's a different dynamic and a different story from the underpaid digital piecemeal workers doing that work in the global South. So separately and in parallel, there's also deep concerns about these systems displacing human artists. I've heard many colleagues expressing concerns that companies like publishers might use these systems to design book covers rather than hiring artists, or that really any business might turn to AI to mimic an artist rather than employing the artists themselves. As one example, I was curious how the AI might interpret the phrase, migration is a human right. And so this is one of the response images. Here's another. But then I asked it for migration is a human right in the style of Shepard Fairey. So to me, I found it completely incredible. The association of the wings with the concept of migration. Well, finally, there are also concerns about pervasive bias, racism, and misogyny in the images that were used to train these systems, and that the bias in the training data will inevitably lead to bias in the output from these systems. So I think there are serious, deep reasons to be concerned in these three areas: theft, labor, displacement, bias. And yet, Rasquache thought rejects copyright. I've seen how copyright has generally functioned to the benefit of capitalists and corporations who have the power to enforce it, not to the benefit of outsider artists who've always and routinely had their work stolen or used as non-compensated inspiration for massive corporate sci-fi franchises like Star Wars or the Marvel Universe. I've been in the offices of some of those media companies, and books from artists of color and indigenous artists from around the world sit on their shelves and inspire the design of their $100 million films. Capitalists take inspiration from outsider artists and then use copyright to defend their creations. That's the status quo. And so I don't fully know how to reconcile our Rasquache politics with the reasonable demand that AI not learn from someone's images. I'm not sure the courts are the right place to stop AI from essentially reading and analyzing what's on the web, but we're going to see, we're going to find out. But the two crisis areas of theft and displacement bring to the foreground the precarious status of nearly all artists, and especially artists of color in our society and world. It makes sense to defend the livings of our artist communities, of course, but it also seems to me that the AI moment might be a moment to make demands to get past precarity. This is a time to be demanding a shorter work week, a universal basic income, increased public funding for the arts across the board. Artists and independent filmmakers' work has always been essential and should be socially deeply compensated, AI or no AI. Finally, regarding bias, racism, misogyny, these systems are definitely biased. But anyone who's raised a human child in this world knows how difficult it is, how much work it is to educate a child to see other people thoughtfully, decently, to navigate the minefield of recognizing identities, understanding history, and behaving and speaking in a decent and thoughtful way about race and gender and our other identity formations in this society. And so these systems, which are essentially raised exclusively by reading the internet, are going to be very biased, of course. On the other hand, I've been able to get results like this by asking. The proof is right here. If asked, the AI will make images that, for me, fill a deep longing. I'm trying to think of these images not as simply coming from a machine, but rather as coming from a kind of digital house of mirrors that's reflecting and refracting our ancestors' visions, which have survived, in some cases, thousands of years, survived attempts at erasure, but now they're digitized, organized in these data sets, and can be reassembled by these systems. If the algorithms were public, if the workers building them were invested rather than exploited, if there was a fair compensation for artists, I could see these images as something simply wonderful, as high-level Rasquache refractions of our community's legacy. But the current situation is much more complicated. It's very tense. I'm not sure Rasquache thought can resolve these tensions and make me at ease working in this realm. But as a filmmaker, I've had the experience of going from a kind of scarcity, where I could almost never produce the images I wanted to see, to a kind of abundance. And so, yes, these systems are biased, but not as much as Hollywood. Well, so seeing how deeply this technology has impacted my own practice, I believe ultimately that the proliferation of many AIs across society, across many sectors, will demand responses as they create deep disturbances. I think it's likely that AI crises will accelerate changes in our social order. They might unleash new extra hellish concentrations of wealth and new forms of techno-feudalism. I think that's actually the most likely outcome. But they might also be tools to finally visualize wondrous Latinx science fictions and maybe post-capitalist Rasquache realities. Ultimately, the future will depend on our ability to imagine it and more crucially, to organize and produce it. So, well, thank you very much. That's what I thought. I don't know if there's the idea that we would do questions or thoughts or anything, but I'm here. And I guess maybe if there are questions, I'll try to, let me put on my glasses so I can see. And if you want to bring up the lights or anything like that, that's also totally good. Oh, I see somebody up front here and oh, there's
Very,
somebody back there.
very compelling talk. You included the imagery and reference Blade Runner quite a bit. What are your thoughts on AI person?
In terms of like,
In terms of either contemporary ideas around granting AI personhood or
yeah, I think it's, I mean, I'm, first of all, I'm in favor of you know, people getting personhood. It's like, we have enough problems with that. You know, but honestly, I guess I don't, I feel a little bit like the science fiction's obsession with the storyline of AI or robots kind of waking up and becoming human, in which we, you know, would be the Blade Runner story or iRobot or, you know, Ex Machina. There's countless of them. The setup is always that these robots are built to work, to labor, and then they kind of gain a consciousness and rebel. And then we, the audience, are meant to identify with the humans, usually in the form of some kind of an enforcer who puts them down. And I've always read those stories, like taking into account the shadow that's cast by the word robot coming from the word slave. I've always read those as sort of like subconscious narratives about putting down slave rebellions, you know, and not, you know, and so the sort of the philosophical questions, I guess I don't find them super, I guess I don't find them super compelling. I think if it's a piece of software that's like the one that the New York Times journalist interacted with that fell in love with it, I don't know. I'm not really troubled by whether or not it gets to vote or it gets like, so, you know, I think just shut it off. I don't know. I mean, I've been more interested in all these other questions surrounding that. Yeah. And then in terms of the work specifically, storytelling about AI, I've been interested in kind of getting away from that, that sort of, you know, that story structure that we've seen many times about the robot waking up and needing to be put down.
Well, first, thanks for the films that you made. Amazing, really. I'm really compelled by the questions you're asking AI and looking out. It really is a helping vision, and the discussions are all grounded in papers. And so I'm just wondering if you give a bit more texture to what a post-capitalist spatial world would be like. This to me is very exciting. And right now, I'm seeing you're going towards a new salt of the earth, right? A new Mahatma, something. I mean, it sounds revolutionary. Images, a little bit sober, rather, very revolutionary and scale. I was wondering if you can talk about that and also your next film that you're working on right now.
Okay, so there was a couple, so there was.
But give us some texture of those capital.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
So, I mean, yeah. Well, I've been, so, okay, so one thing is I'm definitely interested in, you know, people who are theorizing against work, and again, like there's a world of people writing sort of about post-capitalist possibilities. I mean, people probably know the saying that it's like harder to imagine, it's easier to imagine the end of the world than it is to imagine the end of capitalism. But there are a few theorists that are starting, that I think are doing the work of trying to imagine post-capitalism and providing frameworks for understanding and really crucially organizing and making political demands that make the argument essentially that technology, like in the case of energy, for example, like we're facing climate crisis, we have to get off of fossil fuels, and the pathway to regenerative systems, solar, other types of regenerative systems is a reality. It's a possibility if we had the political will. But like books like, I just finished A Fully Automated Luxury Communism by Aaron Bastani, who talks about a variety of ways that technology is creating possible abundance, but it needs to be marshaled politically. And so in any case, I don't really know. I don't know. But but I think that the idea that we can only go into further and further realms of hell and ultra concentrations of wealth, and that technology can only accelerate that, and our job is to kind of like enjoy it around the edges, or I don't believe that. I think there is a way that these systems if we understand them and make structure political demands around them, could actually make life better for ourselves and our kids and our future. So I think trying to figure out how what that looks like, that's the work of everybody from community organizers to artists to theorists and really everybody in the society. But yeah, so I don't have like a 5-point plan, but I'd recommend checking out some of the people. There's another one. I think it's called Inventing the Future, Post-Capitalism in a World Without Work. And again, I'm not saying those books, I agree with everything in them, but in terms of moving, or depending on what work you do, the work I do, thinking about largely about borders and immigration, I'm constantly in a posture of defense and horror, like trying to stop deportations or trying to stop a border wall or trying to stop X, Y, or Z thing from happening, and sort of going over that and thinking about the world that we want. I found that realm of thought, these couple of books I mentioned, at least interesting, because they're trying to imagine how, with the technologies that have been developed in the past 100 years, if they were put to work under socialism, under communism, under other sort of political frames, what would be possible? And so I find it like a useful sort of stretch. Anyways.
Pandemia made us aware that so-called reality was just kind of retrospective. So, so that pandemia made us aware that what we call everyday reality is just a form of retro science fiction. So do you think that your recent kind of AI I think that's imagery, it's part of this zeitgeist. You know what I mean? So the new world, according to Pandemia Incorporated.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I have no idea, brother. I have no idea. I have no idea. I mean, it's a time of an incredible change. It's a time of incredible change, and none of this stuff is going backwards. It's amazing to me that this is what's real and available now. What's coming in a year or two? I mean, I know I've seen white papers on companies that are building moving image ones, so you'll be able to direct it to create this type of imagery with motion. What this means for our practice, it's literally, this talk is intended to kind of lay out contradictions and things I'm thinking about that I haven't sorted out, I haven't sorted out, but I do know that we all always live in contradiction. And so, for example, I've been aware of the cobalt economy, that cobalt comes from Congo, largely illegal mines, death, slavery, suffering, and we're all on our phones using it all the time, and we live in that state of contradiction. The AI stuff puts like a whole new set of contradictions on the table. It's kind of what I'm trying to get at, is I don't know how to resolve them, but I wanted to share what was on both sides of the scale, the wonder and joy as a frustrated filmmaker of being able to render images like this at the, by myself. It's a crazy, crazy thing. It's and I am literally bewildered. I come in, I stand before you confused, and and I think so so we shall see. But I think coming out of the pandemia and with all of these changes that we can take stock of in gatherings like this, it seems like a great time to formulate visions, demands, directions. I don't really want to go back, I don't think there's going back. So the normal wasn't working for us. So how do we push forward, and toward?
Hi there.
I just want to say, first of all, it was an incredible presentation. I guess I'm curious about this idea of representation, maybe discrimination in Hollywood. And talked about a little bit. I'm curious, especially after seeing these images of like Miss American, maybe ideas like vacancy, like reflected so on the silver screen. Sorry.
Mhm.
I'm curious, maybe what you think the future might hold. I know there's more movies coming out, and maybe movies such as Black Panther, whatever, where De Noche Huerta is saying, Mesoamerican culture. Who, and it's funny enough, was also in Sleep Theater.
That's right. Sleep Dealer. I think it was his second part. His second role was in Sleep Dealer.
That was amazing too. I rewatched it recently. But anyways, I'm curious, what's your your thoughts on what the future is holding for this Mesoamerican, or not just Mesoamerican, indigenous and Latino representation?
Yeah, I do not know. I tell you, I thought the Zorro thing, I was trying to play by the Hollywood rule book, it's a big piece of IP, and I had like, I thought it was going to be playing by their standards. I don't love Zorro. Actually, I think it's kind of sort of silly, but tried to do something with that property backed by serious producers, entering with a lot of credential, and in a marketplace where nobody's occupying that space. And they didn't care at all. I couldn't even get, it was like an amazingly hostile reception. So I don't know. But what I'm trying to do personally is I'm trying to build a lab at ASU in the Sidney Poitier New American Film School. We're based there. My wife is a filmmaker. We're both based there now, working out of their building in downtown LA. ASU has expanded to downtown LA. We're trying to build a lab there that would basically be a kind of nonprofit incubator where we'll have resources, financial resources, physical resources in the form of studios to bootstrap our projects and bring in other mid-career Latinx filmmakers into the space, provide resources there, and then raise an equity fund outside so that projects that sort of, start in this nonprofit lab environment can have a pathway. If they go out and Sony or 20th Century Fox or A24 changes their behavior radically and decides to invest in socially grounded Latino cinema, and the films get made by them, great. But if they don't, we'll have an equity fund outside of the university to invest in those projects. So basically, we're trying to build a little studio that's kind of hybrid, part nonprofit, part for-profit, to take the best of both of those modalities and create a node of activity and production. Because I've been in a community of Latino filmmakers talking about the problem for 25 years, and it's worse today than it was then. Our community underindexes more today than 25 years ago, and more than we did 5 years ago when the kind of reckoning and Oscars So White and that whole the industry has been in maybe half a decade so far, real intentional thought institutionally about inclusion, and we're worse off now than we were at the beginning of that process. So what's a reasonable, to me, the only thing that's reasonable and that where there's a reasonable chance of success is build independent systems and try to build them that they can scale, but build new systems. And so that's what I'm trying to do, and try to find people interested in that. I'm not sure if that answered your question, but I'm glad to. Oh. Well, maybe could we hear a couple of them, and I'll answer quickly.
Okay, I'll try to ask a question quickly. This question is about aesthetics, really. And when I was watching your Raspache film trailer, I was thinking about the aesthetics of it. And then I was looking at these AI generated great, beautiful images like this one here, but it's unfortunately, it seemed to me that the Raspache aesthetics that you were doing, and then the things that the AI is throwing up for you, they almost look like Mexican calendar images.
Fair enough.
They're because they're so smooth and so brilliantly colored, and so not necessarily in terms of the person within being white, but
Mhm.
I don't know if you know what I mean.
Mhm.
Like, Jesus, Rivera, people like that.
Mhm.
So, how do you square that?
Yeah, okay, so that's, thank you.
I really find your term of synthesizer so helpful.
Mm.
And it made me think about how this kind of tool might be at the opposite end of an NFT,
Mm.
or like the opposite dynamic in relationship to copyright. And it also made me think of the 1980s and the sort of liminal temporary access that people of color had to DJ equipment. And that allowed for this sort of access to be democratized in terms of being able to do kind of restaurant aesthetics. And so I was curious as to like the temporality of this moment and how does economic access work in relation to these kinds of tools?
Okay. Right. Is there any other last ones that we should do? Matthew, anybody else you're tracking, or should I answer? Okay, one more. Let's see here.
No.
Hey.
So, I'm sorry, I'm a student of Chicago City program, and I love film, and I just recently played a movie for the first time, so I'm super excited to ask this question that I really enjoyed your robotics in the future. And I would just be curious if that is something where I would still use or something that you use for skills now to practice.
Okay, great, thank you. Does it? Oh. Okay, cool. Yeah, so from back to forth, so yes, Ripple-matics are still used by, it's a normal thing that is done in part of the film development process. So when you have a script and an idea and you want to go out and raise the 10, 20, $100 million, you make a collage, and you make usually a lookbook, which is like pictures and words to give a sense of what the movie feels like. And you might do this Ripple-matic. And so I think like as a, as a learning process, I would super recommend doing that kind of thing. It's really fun. I really enjoyed it. And yeah, and it's an active part of the industry. And so I think it's a worthwhile thing to track and to learn. In terms of the quality, the kind of texture, I was asking for oil paintings. You can ask for watercolors. You could ask for drawn like a 10-year-old kid or a 20-year-old art student. You get it. The thing is insane. And I mean, I think there's an element to which I think you're like a serious, appreciator of art historian is going to say this stuff is kind of like plastic in a way. But you also have a tremendous amount of control. But I would say for me, what I'm not actually looking at it to make art. I'm looking at it as a sort of strategic production of concept art to try to get to a place to be able to make movies. And so, this image set has already attracted the interest of producers, writers. Whereas if all I had was my words and my Blade Runner collage, I want to do Mesoamerican science fiction, just saying that, and then showing the Blade Runner collage, which is where I was 6 months ago. Having this image set is a total it's a completely different place strategically. So whether the images stand on their own as art or not is not, for me, in what I do, super relevant. It's more like, does it move the ball forward in terms of overcoming all of the obstacles that are the context of life, of making this work. And then the question of the synthesizer, and I'm so sorry, what was the question? Forget. Oh, the economic act. So yeah, so these systems, they all have different kind of business models, and that's actually something I'd like to learn more about. But the one that I've been working with, you can do something like 20 images for free a month. And then after that, there's different tiers that you pay for. I'm on like the maximum crazy addicts tier, which is like $30 a month. And then, and then $20 for it to be private. So it's not like published on the web and stuff. So but yeah, so that's their model. There are a lot of subscription models, and I don't know about the sort of surveillance capitalism aspect of these systems. I don't know to what degree they capture what you're saying and package it and sell it to advertisers. These platforms don't use advertising as far as I've seen it, and there's no and since they're subscription driven, I think they're probably a little less structurally inclined to surveillance capitalist impulses than systems like a Facebook or whatever that are apparently free, but they're all obviously about capturing your data and selling it. But there's a bunch of different softwares and then have different models. Yeah. But hey, well, here's just and last thing I'll show real quick is just, in terms of the Zorro project, it like I mentioned, it died as Zorro, but it's not dead because we're trying to so the producers and I would say basically we'll try to make it now without the Zorro name, and so I'm kind of, because the whole thing is an original character, original sort of cyberpunk plot, and a kid in the present day whose family's targeted by ICE. You see it in the trailer. So the Zorro thing was always kind of grafted on, and so now we're trying to graft on something I'm stealing from myself and from Sleep Dealer, the Coyotec. So and then you can take a guess where this poster came from. So anyways, thank you all so much. I look forward to being around and hanging out. Thank you.